You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
I wake up in the morning and I'm feeling a vibe. Give thanks to the Father, I'm breathing alive.
Culture and Flavor is a podcast about food and culture centered in Black and Indigenous foodways, hosted by myself, Zella Palmer, right here in New Orleans, Louisiana. Each episode features high vibrational conversations with cultural bearers, chefs, farmers, scholars, barbecue pit masters, and more. Where there is flavor, there is history. Join me on Culture and Flavor and all of my guests as we share stories that will have you praise dancing, cooking, conjuring, and inspiring your culinary journey. Welcome to another episode of Culture and Flavor with your host, Zella Palmer. Today, we have on our podcast the legend, Jim Embry, a longtime civil rights activist who was most recently awarded a James Beard Foundation Leadership Award, has been in the food system activism space and visionary leadership space for 60 plus years. Recently, I saw Jim in September, I think it was. September in Torino, Italy for Terra Madre. Every time I'm around him, anyone who knows him always walks away invigorated, inspired. And I'm so excited to have him on this podcast. And I'm so excited to talk about all things George Washington Carver with him and his most recent project and some of the work that he is doing to inspire the world, because literally the world lays laurels at his feet. I remember every time when we have had dinner, is so many amazing people at his table, so many people empowered, especially our students that look up to him dearly. So welcome, Jim. Welcome to Culture and Flavor.
Thank you. What a lovely morning to spend with you, Zella, and your colleague there. It's wonderful as to close out Black History Month. Okay, what better topic? I can think of no better topic than talking about our beloved George Washington Carver. And thank you for the introduction. I've been involved, I say, in the food justice movement my entire life. And when I got the James Beard Award that you mentioned, I thank you. I began when I got my chance to give my acceptance speech. I began by saying it really isn't about me; it's about we. And the we I meant all of those who've come before me, okay, and all of those who are here now, and those who are on their way in particular, those who are on their way. And I always try to speak in reference to what I do as based upon this family legacy, this family culture of what I call agrarian intellectual activists that my folk were grounded in even before they came to these shores in an enslaved condition. They were already grounded in this great reverence for this great sense of sacred connection with soil and land and food and the cosmos, family, and whatever else. So I'm just proud to be able to extend that kind of family legacy here in these shores and have the great times that you described, to go to Italy for the lovely international gathering sponsored by Slow Food that we call Mother Earth, Terra Madre. So thank you for inviting me here.
Thank you. You know, one of the things that really breaks my heart a lot of times, we've been to Terra Madre twice and taking our students. And it really breaks my heart to see students see the abundance of real food in Italy and open air markets, and the joy that's on their face to try new foods. And when we go around different booths at Terra Madre, and a story that really struck out for me is a student of mine came to me and said, I have migraine headaches when I'm in the States, and
Yeah.
I've had it for years. And
Yeah.
this is the first time that I haven't had a migraine, you
Wow.
know?
Wow.
And so it had me thinking about the state of American foodways, as now it's, kind of in politics with, Robert Kennedy kind of talking about, what's the state of our American food systems and how we go forward in, and with your work in slow food, but more so
Mhm.
outside of slow food, because even Slow Food USA has its challenges.
Yes, yes. Well, let us uh, say that our nation is founded upon this contradiction of stolen land from indigenous people and stolen labor from African people to do what? To do agriculture and foodways. This was the our nation's foundational contradiction of injustice, and it remains, largely the sector that is most abundant with oppressive conditions and lack of pay and lack of adequate pay and all kind of forms of what we call injustice. And the folks who are either the small farmers in the South, black farmers getting, a smaller share of the dollar, or whether it's the farm workers, oftentimes who are working under oppressive conditions that are exploitative and full of chemicals and lack of benefits and lack of adequate pay and lack of retirement benefits and bathroom breaks. That's where women oftentimes are most exploited and sexually abused and so forth. So I think that what we have in our country is this continuing legacy of how, from this European kind of a construct based upon this predatory economic system, that we look down upon food and on agriculture and the workers thereof, and how we even process food as something to be exploited, something to be utilized for financial gain, not something that promotes health of the people, health of the water, health of the soil, okay, health of the water and so forth, but more as a resource for profitability. So that's the nature of our nation, different from other cultures, as we described. This young sister going to Italy, where there's still a great reverence for food, great reverence for delicious food, diversity of food products and varieties, and a reverence for food as processed, where it's health giving, it's life giving. I'm up here now in Washington D.C. I was over the other day at the Sankofa bookstore talking to some young sisters who were at Howard University, and some of them were in the undergraduate, heading, say to nursing school or some health area, and we were all agreeing that even at Howard University and around the country, we don't really have a healthcare system. We have a disease care system. Okay.
Mm.
So, and what she's describing then is that, you know, w- our federal dollars through the USDA go mostly to subsidize corn and soybeans and processed food, unhealthy food. Okay,
Mhm.
we don't spend a lot of money in the federal budget to subsidize healthy food, which means then we make healthy food more expensive. I get times, I'm sure you do too, I get asked, well, Embry, you're promoting, healthy food, organic food. Well, why does it cost so daggone much? That's because of the federal government. Okay,
Mm.
and what kind of foods they subsidize? I said, furthermore, up until World War II, 1940s, human beings all across the world, okay, grew food, what we now call organically, ate organically, okay. When women gave us the gift of agriculture, which is a production of food, in a local area, a regional area, and work around animal husbandry, that was a gift of women. Uh, that was a foundation back then of organic agriculture, okay, 15,000 years ago. But only around World War II, when we came back from the war with all these chemical weapons, all these, mustard gases and gases that we use around in Europe, we had this conundrum of what do we do with all these chemical weapons? And the folks said, well, hell, what we'll do, we will bamboozle the American people, we will bamboozle, using Spike Lee's word from his film, by being bamboozled, and we'll bamboozle, the farmers and saying, well, now you must use all these chemical inputs. Don't use the farm inputs. Use these chemical inputs. These chemicals that we use for fertilizer, herbicides, pesticides are all made from the same chemical gases, chemical weapons that we used during World War II. So now we're in the midst of this great experiment. If we fill up our food and our land, our soil and our water and our air with chemicals, will humans survive? Okay, that's what I call the great experiment. So part of our work, again, as you're so entrenched in and so part of, is how can we turn this mentality around, turn this lens of the world around to where we have this sense of sacred connection with the earth, with the food, with the animals, with the air, with the water, and get us back to, I would say, forward to sanity. Okay, and that food is a sacred sacrament. Each breath of air is a sacred sacrament. Each drink of water is a sacred sacrament. Each bite of food is a sacred sacrament. So we're trying to return a sense of sacredness to food and our relationship with food and all the elements that constitute what we call food. So that's part of the journey, and it's a joyful time. As you know, I go every year on my month-long Joy and Justice journey in June. I travel out west, 25 cities, 15 states, which is a continuation of our Joy and Justice work within Slow Food. I was the chairperson of our Equity, Inclusion, and Justice working group in Slow Food back in 2018. I kind of authored what was called the EIJ Equity, Inclusion, and Justice Manifesto that laid out, kind of a 10-year vision for how we would go about putting Slow Food USA on a skateboard. I said, you're going too damn slow, okay? Can you address that? We go to Italy, we see the Terra Madre gathering with all these people from all over the world. The new president is from Uganda, Eddie McKeeby. We have people coming all from the global south. We says, wow, this is what slow food should look like in the USA. It doesn't quite yet, but that's part of our work.
I'm curious to know, you know, thank you for sharing that, first of all. It puts into perspective just some of the amazing work that you are doing and where you're headed in slow food, because slow food has gone through many changes with
Yeah.
with Alice Waters, and I just want to shout out Mara Welton. She was amazing, and when I look at some of the other slow food chapters in different countries, and to even just see Africa, I saw a lot of African chefs and farmers at this last Terra Madre, which was inspiring. We have a lot
Yes.
of work to do in the
Yes.
US with our food systems.
Yes.
And within that, I know that you are super active. Chef Sean Sherman is definitely active in slow food. What have you learned as far as indigenous wisdom? Because I know you talk about that in your new initiative that you're working on
Hmm.
for the
Hmm.
Department of
Hmm.
Comparative Studies. What have you
Yes.
learned from indigenous wisdom in working with those who cultivate the land in Turtle Island?
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you for that question. As you said, let me go back a minute and just kind of give some little bit of history up to this idea of indigenous wisdom. Again, I come out of a family culture of what I call agrarian intellectual activist. We had three great granddads fought in the Civil War. One of them died in the war. So we come from this long legacy of folk who brought over here and always wanted to resist, always wanted to be free, and always through this quest of love of family, love of social justice, coming out of that kind of agrarian traditions as part of my legacy. My great grandparents, who were they were like children when the Civil War ended, but they went on to what's called Berea College in 1879. They became friends with the likes. This month we're celebrating Black History Month, founded by Carter G. Woodson. They became friends with Carter G. Woodson. Why? Because he was also a student at Berea College. They also became friends with the likes of Ida B. Wells, Mary Church Terrell, W.B. Du Bois, and George Washington Carver, all who they brought to Richmond, Kentucky, in the early 1900s as part of this idea of these national networks, largely again of Black agrarian intellectual actors, Black farmers in the South, is what we were connected with. So along the way, this has been my legacy. I helped found a natural foods co-op in 1972. I met Dick Gregory in 71.
Mm.
He put his foot in my behind, okay, had me, inspired me to adopt, a plant-based diet and this real sharp critique, okay, of the U.S., food and ag industry and how it promotes disease and not health, things of that nature. And I've gone on to do, all sorts of things. Went to Cuba back when Fidel was living in 2004 to study the Cuban approach to organic agriculture. And also the Cuban, they have truly there a healthcare system. They promote prevention. Over here, we promote drugs and surgery. So along the way, I've been a part of many different kinds of social movements, all the ones of my era. I've always been involved always in the food justice movement, even called environmental justice movement, and how those kind of things impact people of color. And I have tried to form different kind of approaches around this idea of how do we use this intersect of food and agriculture to kind of create what we call this sustainable future. Okay. And now I've come over the last 5 or 6 years to, I call 6 pathways to a sustainable future. And they're based upon the work I've been doing over the last at least 65 plus years. The first pathway being we have to have a lens of the world based upon being earth-centric and woman-centric, and they're tied together. Again, because we all come through women. And oftentimes we talk about sustainability and don't mention women, okay? How the hell can we be sustainable, okay, and just, and not work on how we love, protect, and ensure that women, okay, are having the great environment to produce, the progeny of the future. The second pathway is what we call indigenous wisdom. Then yes, we're here in what we call Turtle Island. The folks we call indigenous have been here, people say 10,000, 20,000, some say 40,000 years. And they just might know something about sustainability. We're just blessed that we're here in Turtle Island, North America, and the Americas, where so many different kind of food products have been developed over the last several thousand years, especially corn, which is, again, as you know, is a sacred old member of the family that extends throughout all the Americas. And indigenous women spent almost 9,000 years taking what was called wild corn or teosinte, and called hybridizing it into what we call corn today, okay? And how that wild plant looked with an open kind of a tassel, looking almost like wheat. Now it's enclosed, as you know, in these husks, and we have so many different kind of varieties of corn. So my point is, this second pathway, meaning indigenous wisdom, that the way to the future has to be where we're grounded in indigenous wisdom. Okay, however we came here, whether we came on ships from Europe and chains from Africa, or even some of the recent immigrants, however we came here, we must all be grounded in this indigenous wisdom of Turtle Island and the way forward. The third point, real quickly, is George Washington Carver and the African American ethos, meaning that the African experience in America is foundational to this way forward. We must learn from, appreciate, embrace, better understand, our journey here in America especially as enslaved African people, and what we brought with us was thousands of years of cultural wisdom and appreciation for food and dance and all the art forms and all kinds of skills from growing rice and growing all kinds of crops of what we brought over here, and our years of resistance, our years of activism, our years of seeking, justice and liberation and reparations is all part of this way forward. And then the fourth pathway is what we call youth, art, and hip hop. The fifth pathway is seeds and the Terra Madre network. The last pathway is a vision that is transformative. So those things, those pathways are written in a linear kind of fashion, but they're meant to be conceived of as being all integrated, all interrelated, and part of a holistic kind of a sense of pathway to the future. But again, and I define indigenous as those folk here in North America that we call Indian or Native American. Yes, that's indigenous, but also to remember that we all came from indigenous people. Okay, when Africans, our people were captured, like human trafficking of 500 years ago, 400 years ago, we were indigenous people in Africa. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and so we came here in enslaved condition, but we were indigenous people. That's why I think that we were able to connect so well with those folk who we regard as Native American and indigenous to Turtle Island. But also, my premise is that we have to move even beyond the sense of being indigenous based upon land, and we must proclaim that all human beings, okay, all human beings are indigenous to the earth, and that our responsibility, okay, is to act like the earth is our mother. She is the source of all that has evolved the last 4.5 billion years, that all the people are our family, not just human people, but the animal people, the rock people, the plant people, the air people, the water people, the fire people. These are all our relations. And those are the kinds of principles of life, I think, that are that oftentimes we can gain that kind of insight, what we call indigenous people from here in North America.
Mm. Ooh, y'all hear that? Every time I listen to Jim, I just walk away with just like, I just want to just say amen. But this during this recording, this is during
Yeah.
Black History Month, and I want to lift up George Washington Carver. I
Yes.
want to
Yes.
lift up Booker T. Washington.
Yes.
Um, and I have sitting next to me, and I suggest that my listeners read this book. It's one of my favorite books by George Washington Carver. It's by Rackham Holt,
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
that's a classic, yes.
It is. It
And
is.
it was, I think it was published in the 1940s. Yes, in the
Yeah.
1940s.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
recently, well, but last Black History Month, I was invited to speak and to cut the tape for uh, a food pantry that was being named after my great grandfather, who was the director of the VA hospital at Tuskegee right after World War One, and they named a food pantry after him. And for me, it was super emotional. I think I've told you all this story before, but I
Mhm.
remember also my grandmother telling me stories of sitting on George Washington Carver's lap, her playing in his
Wow.
garden,
Oh, wow. Oh,
and to
wow.
be able to go visit his gravesite and that of Booker T's and just take a moment just to give thanks was a huge honor for me. And
Yeah.
I know that you also had a personal connection with Carver. You mentioned
Yes.
W.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells. Why is it important for us now more than ever to tell their stories beyond the watered down version of the Peanut Man, and even, the way that Booker T. Washington isn't, reveled as much as in
Yes.
our community as he used to be?
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I agree absolutely. Let me just make some quick references here that I think there are just only two books that are out about Carver that were based upon interviews, actual interviews with him. Okay. And one of them was the book you referenced, Rackham Holt. And I was approached about a year and a half ago uh, uh, by an author who wanted to republish that book and kind of like add a forward and a preface and whatever else. And I was asked to write a piece for that, and we're still kind of in negotiation around the rights to the book and things of that nature. But this woman, actually, it's a woman, Rackham Holt, spent time with Carver, and it's a marvelous book because it's more about a conversation, okay, that she was having. So we'll see how that book turns out if we can get it Again, we published with some new prefaces and things of that nature.
I would
But
love to see that.
absolutely, but I agree. In my view of the future, okay, this idea of sustainable future, one of the important pathways, and I call it George Washington Carver and the African American ethos. And that ethos, as you know, means all of our experiences in being in North America since our being brought over here, either being brought over here in an enslaved condition, or whether we were sailing over here, as we know we did, hundreds, maybe thousands of years before we were brought here in an enslaved condition. We were crossing the Atlantic, long before that. There's a whole experience we've had, and we now call the Americas. But the way forward, I'm saying that it has to be a guiding light, has to be, again, our African American ethos. And in my view, George Washington Carver, around this intersect of food and agriculture, is like this beacon of light that includes many people like a Booker T. Washington, a Booker T. Watley, a Fannie Lou Hamer, Harriet
Hmm.
Tubman, and so they're all part of this ethos. And that the ability of Harriet Tubman to not only to free herself, but to go back dozens of times to free others was based upon her intimate knowledge of the cosmos. Okay, she could read the stars, understand the North Star and the various planets and where the North was. She had an intimate relationship with the flora and the fauna. She knew what moss growing on this side of the tree meant. She knew how to follow the water system. She knew what kind of plants could be eaten, which plants were medicinal, how to gather, acorns and hickory nuts. So she was also an agriculturalist, okay, a food forager, okay, that enabled her to move back and forth and never lose anyone, okay, on her Underground Railroad as conductor. But George Washington Carver, for all kinds of reasons, in my view, is a like a sequoia tree in the forest of the African American ethos. Okay, and there are many people who also represent being sequoia trees and redwood trees, and we all can be a tree. Okay, I might be a dogwood tree, some might be an oak or an elm, or hickory or whatever. But there's some people who like sequoia trees. Okay, and Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, Paul Robeson, Mary Church Terrell, and folks like that represent these tallest trees in our forest. But Carver, because he was born at a certain time, at the end of the Civil War, and because he, in essence, was kind of like born, if you want to call it that, in a hole in the ground that might have been 10 feet deep. Okay, his father got killed in I think a farming accident. His mom got kidnapped. He got brought back by the Moses and I think Mary Carter, who kind of owned them reluctantly. But he was already 10 foot. He was born and raised, if you will, already 10 foot hole in the ground, not the
Hmm.
even ground or even playing surface. And out of that 10 foot hole in the ground, not only did he emerge out of that 10 foot depth, but achieved almost the highest accolades, the highest sense of his humanity that almost anyone could achieve in his lifetime. Okay, he was, as you know, friends with the likes of always great scientists, Albert Einstein, Thomas Edison, the car magnate, Henry Ford. But Edison and Einstein regarded Carver. They said he was the greatest scientist of their era, not the greatest black scientist, not the greatest American scientist, but the greatest scientist of their era. And they weren't too bad themselves. That's how they regarded him. In my view, he was a person who was approaching, if you want to call it, a lens of the world. It was about 360. If we're fortunate, we go to college, we come out of there maybe with a 90-degree lens, if we're, maybe even a 150-degree lens as a college graduate. But to be sustainable, is my view, we must be able to view the world, have a world lens that is 360. And in my view, Carver approached that lens of seeing the world in a 360 kind of a way. In my view, he was also someone who almost who best emulated indigenous wisdom and culture, okay, in a whole variety of ways. Okay, he was because he was sickly when he was young. The Moses Carver and his wife said, "Well, George, you don't have to work on the farm field like your brother. You can just kind of go out and play in the garden, play in the forest." So the flowers, the trees, the frogs, the squirrels, the wind and the rain were his teachers, okay, his formative years. So the question becomes, wow, if we want our children to grow up with a 360 lens, if we want our kids to grow up in a sense of joy and peace and reverence for life and a reverence for people, and to achieve all these great achievements as a scientist, as an agriculturalist, as whatever your profession is, Carver, in my view, is a wonderful model and example of how to be, how to live. Carver's quote is that we're all ordinary beings, but we're meant to do extraordinary work. Okay, so I just feel that because of this, again, because of this foundational contradiction of our nation, stolen land from indigenous people, stolen labor from African people to do what? To do agriculture and foodways. And I also view then food and agriculture not only as a foundational contradiction, but food and ag, for various reasons, also are the fulcrum point of transformation. Okay, because again, beyond breathing air and drinking water, the most essential thing that we do as humans is eat. Everyone's involved in the food movement, and we all have to change. We all have to change. And part of our work, again, is to have this great remembering, this great restoration of the sacred connection we have with food. So, in that sense, then, Booker T. Washington, wow, what a wonderful individual, brilliant in all kind of ways. He had the brilliance to recognize that, he'd heard about there's this black guy out there at Iowa State, okay, who's the first African American to go to Iowa State, the first one to get a bachelor's degree and a master's degree from Iowa State in agriculture. I want him, okay, I want him to come here to Tuskegee because Booker T had already been, Booker T in 1894, he had already, I think, established that first Black Farmer Conference there at Tuskegee. So he understood from forming Tuskegee the important role of agriculture as a foundation for our experience as a people of trying to come out of enslavement and literally what the boys called Black Reconstruction. He was saying has to be founded upon land, food, agriculture, farming. He understood that if we're going to survive and thrive, it's going to be based upon how well we can cultivate our land, our farms, much like we did that when we were back, say, home, say in Africa. This deep devotion to land, food, and agriculture. As we know, again, women gave us the gift of agriculture 15,000 years ago. And all of our arts, okay, are based upon humans' relationship with food. We created religion. Why? To pray that we're going to eat tomorrow. Maybe we'll find some berries. Maybe we'll find some food. Maybe we'll find some animals. The whole idea of music was creating songs that celebrated the harvest, songs that would evoke hope it rains tomorrow, songs that would evoke the spirits of grains and harvest. Dances were low to the ground, celebrating the lamb. So the point is, pottery wasn't just something that you would make up real pretty to hang in a museum. Pottery was used as a vessel for holding, collecting food and water and things of that nature. So all the arts, again, I'm saying, have the foundation within humans' relationship with food and agriculture, and that the way forward, I'm saying that Carver and his wonderful tenure there for almost 50 years at Tuskegee, based upon the invitation by Booker T. Washington, these two folks, in my view, are the foundational elements, okay, of how we relate to food and agriculture. But what happened, Booker T died, I think maybe in the 20s, somewhere like that. Carver died in the 40s, 40, I think 43, and they pretty much got whitewashed and blackwashed. That means that they're profoundly important ideas, they're revolutionary ideas, their sense of tying to the land and agriculture and so forth have been in many ways forgotten about. When I go around the country and speak, whether it's at HBCU or whether it's at a oh, HWCU or a historically white college, I find that very few uh, colleges, especially in their ag department, are adding to their curriculum works and writings and the wonderful legacy of George Washington Carver. When I was
Mhm.
Central State up in Ohio and Kentucky State, and I spoke there. And when I reviewed their website and did a search for Carver, there was nothing on the website. Okay, so I think it's we need to regain our sanity, okay, and lift up, okay, these folks as we think about the way forward. And again, back to my own family, again, my great grandfather and mother became friends with, again, Du Bois and Ida B. Wells, Mary Church Terrell, George Washington Carver, and brought them folk to Richmond, Kentucky, near where I live now, 3 or 4 times as part of what's called the Covered Chautauqua. I have, matter of fact, in my book possession, one of Carver did about 44 bulletins over his years at Tuskegee. That he did all the illustrations, did all the writings. They were books that were written, if you will, in the simple English language to be understood by farmers and folk in the South. I have one of those original bulletins of around 1905, I believe it is.
Mm.
So I have so I have, so I have just a deep love and devotion to Carver, and have been writing about him and speaking about him. And just a quick note, and I'll hush up here for a while, that one of the innovative things going on, first of all, is that David Robinson out there in San Antonio has begun this incredible George Washington Carver Academy, and he is
Mm.
basing what we call STEM. Maybe it's called STEAM by some folks, adding the arts in there, but it's based upon the life and legacy of George Washington Carver. He just feels that you're going to talk about STEM. There's no better person in U.S. history that represents STEM than George Washington Carver. So we've been on the phone a couple of times. I'm also working with Ohio State University. Um, they got this $10 million grant from NASA and various other large corporations to build this space station, a 3-story space station that's supposed to go to Mars in about 2040. And on the
Mm.
space station, they have what's called the George Washington Carver Science Lab. And this science lab is devoted to the legacy of George Washington Carver. And they're using some of
Mm.
Carver's principles of agriculture on this space station. Carver, as you may know, he wrote 3 bulletins about using the sweet potato. And what he would say is, don't just eat the tuber, but also eat the leaves. So up in
Mm.
Ohio State, they're working right now again on this replica of the space station, and they're growing plants in zero gravity, and they're growing sweet potatoes. Okay, it's about 9 months to a year journey from Earth to Mars. Means it's a 2-year journey back and forth. And if you eat the tubers, you'll run out. But if you're eating things like sweet potatoes to eat the leaves, then you can have food for this 2-year voyage back to Mars. But they're basing that work around, again, growing plants in zero gravity based upon the legacy of George Washington Carver. What they're also using as part of Carver's legacy is that, as you may know, Carver was one of the premier mycologists of his era. As we know, for the listening audience, mycology is the study of fungi. Carver had 4 fungi named after him. He said, enough is enough, no more, no more. But he literally found or discovered, thousands of fungi species and sent them up into DC to the various fungi, herbarium, places where you kind of store fungi species. Well, what they're doing, Azella, in the new space station, they're lining the walls of this, again, 3-story space station with compressed fungi. Okay, having learned some of the attributes of fungi from Carver's work. Why fungi? Because fungi, first of all, as they line the walls, fungi is non-toxic, which means you don't want to have toxic chemicals, vapors leaching out of your construction materials going on a 2-year voyage. Also, because fungi is non-flammable. Okay, if you have fires, it won't catch fire. And thirdly, because fungi also, if it breaks down, then you can compost it. Because on the space station, there's no waste, okay, on the space station. Okay, everything has to be returned to some type of organic uh, uh, recycled system. Everything has to be recycled and reused back and forth. So the point is, is that I've been saying that other colleges, and when I go around and talk about Carver's relevance, I'm saying Ohio State, for various reasons, understands his legacy and the importance. Okay, they're saying if we're going to go to Mars, if we're going to go to Mars, it's because of the legacy and the light and love and the traditions of George Washington Carver. So I'm encouraging other folks to find all kind of ways. Carver was also good friends with Henry Ford, and it's a book that I promote often. It's called The Green Vision of Ford and Carver, and their vision was that they wanted to base a U.S. industry, the industrial manufacturing, industrial production, based upon products grown by American farmers. Of course, Carver was devoted, of course, to that intersect with black farmers, making sure that black farmers are part of this production of all kinds of agricultural products to be the foundation of U.S. industry. That was their vision. They were building cars from soybeans. They were building car bodies from soybean oil, for example. They were making rubber from various items, not just from rubber plants. They were using flaxseed. They were using all kinds of products to help build the Ford automobile. But again, Ford died in the 30s. Then Carver died in 43. And Ford's son Edsel said, well, Dad and Carver were crazy. Them fools was crazy, talking about the regional production of farm products and using farm products for to help build this car. They were crazy as fruit cakes. So Edsel decided to join in with the likes of Shell Oil, Exxon, Mobil Oil, and then get us focused primarily on oil as the basis of industry. If we had followed the vision again of Carver and Ford, we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in now. So that's just a few examples, I think, of Carver's legacy and how important it is. All the things that we're doing now, okay, around recycling, reusing. Carver was doing all that in the 1890s. If you go into a coffee shop now or wherever and you want some kind of non-dairy item for your coffee, you want oat milk, almond milk, and so forth. Carver was doing that in the 1890s. Okay. And David Robinson, by the way, he has some incredible films where he's taking the legacy of Carver and showing how it's being utilized today. And it is far beyond, okay, peanut butter, okay. But every week I'm reading more and more about him. He was good friends, and his legacy was so profound. He was friends with all the presidents of his time because at Iowa State, his professor soon became the Secretary of Agriculture. And then that professor's son also became the Secretary of Agriculture. So Carver had the open ear and the friendship of all the presidents of his era. He was good friends also with Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi had heard about Carver, this guy in the USA who was working with black peasants in the South, like Gandhi was working with peasants in India, and Gandhi wanted to learn from Carver how to grow more items that were plant-based to feed the people in India, and they became friends. And then thereafter, one of Carver's friends, Howard Thurman and his wife, were going to the Far East, and I think maybe in the 30s. And Carver said, "Well, he had a high voice. If you're going to go to the Far East, and please go to India, and here's a note, here's a message from our friend Mahatma Gandhi. Please give us to him," which they did. And then I think in the 40s and 50s, I'm forgetting his name, Benjamin Mays, also was going to go to India. As you know, Benjamin Mays was the president of Morehouse College. Benjamin Mays was a friend of Dr. King's father and a friend of Dr. King. But Benjamin Mays also went to India and also took a message for Carver. And that trip by Benjamin Mays and Howard Thurman to visit with Mahatma Gandhi is why Dr. King developed Gandhi's nonviolent philosophy. So I'm just saying that Carver was magnanimous. When you look at where he came from, and what he achieved. Wow.
We're going to come back after a few messages from our advertisers. We thank Jim for being on Culture and Flavor, and we're excited to come back after these messages just to talk about what we can learn from Carver and what is the way forward.
This episode is brought to you by Plugra European-style butter, crafted for those who demand precision and exceptional results in the kitchen. With 82% butter fat and a slow churn process, Plugra gives you flakier crusts, fluffier cakes, and rich, melt-in-your-mouth pastries. Because great baking starts with great butter. Unlike standard American butters, which have only 80% butter fat, Plugra ensures the ideal moisture and fat balance so your recipes turn out just right every time. That's why professional chefs trust Plugra and home bakers love it. Plugra's slow churn process creates a smooth, creamy butter that gives dough a soft, pliable texture, making rolling, folding, and laminating effortless. Whether you're perfecting a buttery pie crust or layering a delicate croissant, Plugra helps you bake with confidence. Experience the difference for yourself. Find Plugra in stores near you or visit plugra.com. That's Plugra.com.
We're back. So, like you and like many of colleagues that I know who are deeply connected with George Washington, Dr. George Washington Carver's work.
Yes.
Um, you know, I've always, I went to an exhibit many years ago. I think it was at the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, and they had an exhibit on George Washington Carver. And there's a lot of museum exhibits that are now happening, and I'm grateful that the word is getting out. And they even have a George Washington Carver museum at Tuskegee University.
Oh yeah.
And there's so much we can learn from him. I'm always, impressed by the fact that he was for the people,
Yes.
for the farmers,
Yeah.
His bulletins, his 101 ways to, grow a tomato. And, nothing was wasted.
Yes.
His bulletins about sweet potatoes, the Jessup wagon. The Jessup wagon was this, cart and wagon that took, knowledge and to around. It was a teaching. It was a school on wheels. And would go to the farmers, local farmers. It was helping Black farmers. It was helping white farmers in the deep, deep, deep South.
That's right.
And his work globally with polio,
Yes.
And I think, when we move forward and we allow the watered down version to come out, it messes us up big time, and I think about just how, insecure we are in our communities. And this goes for everyone in the States. I mean, we see it during COVID, I've had these conversations with colleagues previously, like, what can we barter in times of struggle? Nothing,
Yes.
And
Yes.
George Washington Carver was empowering the whole world to show you how to, grow, um, bigger cabbage,
Right.
I could get more yield of this or that, crop
Uh-huh.
rotation, and
Uh-huh.
providing that knowledge for free. That is now, unfortunately, all of his patents, all of his, it's no longer, I mean, he didn't have any descendants, but
Right.
it isn't
Right.
available to the public as we'd like it to be.
Yes. 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 Absolutely. You know, I've been writing about Carver again last 12, 15 years. And as I was saying, like you were saying, I'm always still learning more about his life and who he touched. Because of his friendship with the presidents and as well as the Secretary of Agriculture, okay, who was his professor and the son of his professor, then he was a person who helped inspire what's called the Victory Gardens of World War One and World War II. Okay, he's given little or no credit for that, but that was, as we know, when you read some of the correspondence between he and the Secretary of Ag, you can clearly see that clear understanding. But also, he taught us so much about how to relate uh, to the evils of Jim Crow and the black codes and racism and even like now with this turn back of all the progressive gains of around equity and justice and diversity for all kinds of people. One of the stories I like to tell is like when he went up, I think 1921, he was asked by the peanut industry, the peanut companies, to go to D.C. to speak at the House Ways and Means Committee about asking the Congress to put a tariff on international peanut supply coming into United States. And by the way, if I can, a quick note about the peanut. The peanut's origin, according to anthropologists and other kinds of folk, originated somewhere in South America. And then when the Spanish and the Portuguese were over there, trying to take the land and the riches, they brought peanuts back to Europe, but the Europeans didn't like them. Okay, and they weren't a big hit. But then those same folk, the Spanish and the Portuguese, as they were intersecting and going and marauding, Africa, took peanuts, okay, in their voyages to Africa, and the Africans thought, well, this peanut reminded them of the ground nut, okay, in Africa, and they developed, a kind of a close kinship or a close likeness for the peanut, and then that peanut then was kind of brought to the Americas, to North America, as part of this whole exchange of food products and Africans being enslaved. And then the peanut began to be grown in the South, as you know, and the peanut was one of the primary rations, especially of the black soldiers as part of the U.S. colored troops, because the peanuts again didn't spoil; they would last a long time, they were nutritious, and so forth. Was a primary ration during the Civil War, which also then was part of the foundation of how Carver began to use it so much at his work at Tuskegee. And he went on to, and according to him, part of our thought about a sustainable future has to be how well can we either develop or redevelop our ability to communicate with all the other non-human uh, life forms, okay? And Carver and these African traditions and indigenous traditions said that he was given by God the capacity to talk to the peanut plant, and she in turn was willing to share with him all the items that could be made from her. So Carver says that he didn't discover anything, and he really never issued any, or never asked for any kind of patents. He said the peanut plant told me everything about her. I went to the laboratory and then created some 300 plus items. So we have to figure out a way. And up at Cornell, I'm working with Cornell University, and what we're doing up there, they have a new program called CROPS, and it's a very interdisciplinary program. And one of their points of focus, Zella, is that they're researching how do humans communicate with plants based upon, again, the legacy of George Washington Carver, who said, I talked to the peanut plant and other trees and plants as well, but especially to the peanut plant. So part of our work, I think, in universities and K through 12 is get our students outside of the actual brick and mortar classroom, get them into the garden, and get them in situations where they can actually have this one-on-one, if you will, with plants and trees and things of that nature. Because again, trees have been around, flowering trees have been around about 200 million years. Talk about sustainability. Some of the oldest things on the earth, okay, are trees. As you know, if you go to California and you study some of the redwoods and sequoias, if you go to Africa with the baobab tree, over there, some of those trees are 5, 6, 7, 8,000 years old. They might know something about sustainability. So part of our work is, again, is to recreate this capacity, this ability to talk to plants. Okay, literally talk to plants. So I think that's the kind of thing that so back to the point of what House Ways and Means. Okay, so Carver was invited to come to the House Ways and Means Committee and talk about this tariff on peanuts. These are all white men. Most all of them were Southern white men. Okay, and when he went in, and by the way, you can get this recording because it's part of the congressional record, both as a recording as well as the actual written record. And they opened up. I said, "Okay, boy, we hear you're here to talk about terrorists, okay? And we ain't got much time. But look here, you got about 15 minutes to testify, and whatever way you want to about peanuts," was what they told him from Jump Street. Then they said to him, trying to ridicule him, "And by the way, boy, did you bring some watermelon with you?" Okay. Now, Carver's response. We can learn a lot about Carver and so many of his life experiences, but the one here I think is so important because it reminds us when we're confronted with racism, when we're confronted with white supremacy, when we're confronted with all these forms of injustice and nonverbal or microaggressions, how do we respond? We don't want to forget, what is your purpose for going there? Is your purpose to be angry, to be upset, to respond back, defensively? What's your purpose? So Carver responded this way. He says, well, in a high voice, "Well, if I had known you all wanted some dessert, I would have brought some watermelon. And if you invite me again, I will be if you invite me again, I will be sure to bring some watermelon next time." Okay.
Mm.
So he went on and he brought with him all kinds of stuff, to show and tell with. But they had allocated to him, they said 15 minutes. And he went on to speak, but he spoke like he knew that even these white racist men had to change, okay? And he wasn't there to antagonize them, to defend himself, to fight back, to get angry. He was there to help get this tariff passed. So, uh, so the folks in the South, especially the black farmers, could raise peanuts and get a good value for what their crop was. So what happened is he went on for first 15 minutes. Then said, "Look here, boy, you sounded pretty good. You got 15 more minutes." And he was there. He was there an hour and a half. Okay, they kept saying, "Tell us more." He was spellbinding. Okay, so that to me is a wonderful example that sometimes in our lives we'll be confronted in a similar kind of a way. Okay. And he was a person who was talking about peace and loving and caring, but he also was able to, I'll call it, he was able to take this antagonism and to flip it from a negative to a positive. And in our lives, we are always confronted with the same situation. How can we take antagonism? How can we take words of injustice and actions and flip it, okay, to a positive and be able to get our purpose out of that? So again, he was just a wonderful example of things like that. And as you were saying, his Jessup wagon. He was able to gain the trust of many white folk who had money, from Ford, to Morris Jessup, and who funded the Jessup wagon. As you were saying, the Jessup wagon, in many ways, is the model for what we call now the extension service from land grant colleges. Is based upon Carver's work, the Jessup wagon. And I would say he took around all kinds of things, as you know, books, bulletins, flowers, plants. But he was also, I regard him now as well as a seed man. Okay.
Mhm.
As you know, he worked with all kinds of crops, from sweet potatoes and cowpeas and peanuts and you name it. Okay, but these were seeds. And right now, part of our global situation is that seeds are controlled by just a few large corporations. In America, most of our seeds come out of Europe, and there's a desperate need for us to ground ourselves, okay, in this work around seeds. Great variety of seeds. We need to reestablish a great variety of seeds. We must connect up as we do when we go to Italy for the Ark of Taste. The seeds there get grounded in the global network of seed savers and seed growers globally, and to be able to get more seed production being done locally and regionally. I want to say lastly, real quickly, about the idea of the role of farmers and Carver in our nation's history. Again, I had three great grandfathers that fought in the Civil War. Two of them fought against General Lee in Virginia, and they were able to force his surrender. And they were there when Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox. And then those great grandfathers were also then shipped out in the May of 65 to go to Galveston, Texas, to quell the remaining Confederate troops there in Texas and protect the USA border, okay, they shared with Mexico. But anyway, so it wasn't General Granger, okay, that gave us Juneteenth in June 19th of 65. It was 10,000 Black troops. And again, within the USCT, U.S. colored troops, there were 200,000 Black men and women that fought in the Civil War. We don't want to forget that Harriet Tubman was a premier spy and was able to, I think, gain the freedom of some 700 enslaved persons there, and some situation experienced there in Maryland and Virginia. But anyway, so I'm regarding that, first of all, the 200,000 Black men and women that fought in the Civil War, when they mustered in, you had to sign in what your profession, what your vocation was, what your job was. And most all of them, of course, signed what? They were farmers, okay? And it was the introduction of these 200,000 Black farmers that saved the nation, okay? It was our people. It was our people primarily who were working for 200 years as farmers that saved the nation. Because when Lincoln finally allowed Black folks to fight in 1863, the North was losing the war. The South had the upper hand. And Lincoln thought, wow, I'd better follow the ideas of Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and Martin Delany, and let Black folks fight. Okay. And we were fighting for our own freedom, the freedom of our wives, our children, our mothers, our fathers, our friends. And we fought like hell, and we won, and we helped win the war. So we saved the nation, okay, in 1865. And then along some 50 years later, we get the likes of George Washington Carver, because in the South, the Southern agriculture had collapsed. If you recall, there's some video of what was called the Dust Bowl, because Europeans went west with the same mentality of being predators, destroy the kill the buffalo off, destroy the fertility of the soil, and the Dust Bowl emerged. And the Dust Bowl, some of the video showing dust out of Kansas and Oklahoma and Missouri going all the way to Washington, D.C. So the Southern agriculture was collapsing because it was utilizing the focus primarily around cotton in most of the areas. In some areas, it might be tobacco or corn, but it was collapsing. Carver comes along, as you know, and introduces all these new words we have now about organic farming, regenerative farming, and agroecology. He was doing all of that, okay, in the South, and telling folks, we've got to have a great variety of crops that we're growing, okay, that return fertility, like all the different things in the bean variety, the cowpeas, okay, and growing the sweet potatoes and growing a variety of things to base your small farms upon, but things that also return fertility to the South. So I maintain that Black folk saved the nation twice, okay? Once in the Civil War, and then Carver, in my view, literally saved the South. And if you save Southern agriculture, then you're saving the nation from collapsing. So I'm saying that part of our role now, okay, in this 21st century is to have a remembrance that we're the people who are the heart and soul of this nation in a variety of ways, not discounting anybody else, and in no way belittling, okay, indigenous people, in no way belittling European people or Asian or whomever else, but we are the heart and soul, okay, of this nation. In the South, it's where our blood, our sweat, our grandmamas had babies in the field, and oftentimes they'd be out in the field working, and baby would drop with the help of the doulas and the midwives there. The babies would drop. They would get a piece of cloth, get that baby, cut the cord, get it back on the mama's back, and the mama would keep working in the field. That's how deep our soul is. Okay, when Du Bois writes about the souls of Black folk, he means things like that. So now we're called upon in a similar kind of a way to give vision, to give a sense of future, to give a sense of love for land, soil, the future, based upon these kinds of legacies. But my point is, unless we understand this legacy, okay, understand it, embrace it, and use it, then we won't assume our responsibility, okay, of giving vision, what we call this sustainable future. That's why I say they are essential guiding lights. We have saved the country twice based upon our relationship with land, food, and agriculture, and it's now our responsibility to do that both here in the United States, but also as part of a global network. That's why it's so important, I feel, that we're connecting up with the Terra Madre network and our election, again, real quickly, of Eddie McKeeby, this young brother who's now the president of Slow Food. What that tells me is that we recognize through Slow Food that the future lies in young people. It is a farmer, intellectual, and a young 35-year-old. It also says that the future of the world lies in the hands of young people, okay? And the future of the world also lies in lies in the global South, not the global North. But thirdly, it also lies in how well we as a species of people answer our debt to the African continent, and how well we help support the African continent to rise up, if you will, out of this ashes of 500 years of European colonialism, European white supremacy, European devastation, okay, of these countries and in this continent. How well Africa rises will determine how well we as a species are able to bring into fruition what we call this sustainable future.
Y'all heard that. That was a whole sermon. I think the first part is knowledge, learning about George Washington Carver, reading as many books as you possibly can about George Washington Carver, including the book that I mentioned and that you talked about, Rackham Holden. I think you said another one.
Yeah.
I'll ask you for a homework reading list in a minute.
Yeah.
Definitely reviewing Up From Slavery, which is mandatory reading at Tuskegee University by Booker T. Washington, which I reread every now and then, and it is profound. And of course, W.B. Du Bois. I mean, I can go on and on and on and about him, because that generation was powerful.
Oh, they were.
The work that they were doing. And it's a reason why, it was watered down. All of that work. I mean, they were otherworldly, as I could say.
They were. Yeah, they were.
And, I would love to kind of just think about now, now that we fast forward in our generation, and you even mentioned Dick Gregory pushing you to eat plant-based medicine. And when I think about my student
Mhm,
who,
mhm.
was in Italy and she had, didn't have any migraines. And even remembering a clip that I saw of an interview with Dick Gregory and him talking about how he was, you know, had just moved to Chicago and early and when in his youth, when he started his career and going to a grocery store near the projects and how this grocery store that was and that only sold dog it had, the number one product that was sold in that grocery store was dog food. And then
Yeah.
he had this epiphany that they were selling dog food to our communities,
Yes.
and
Yes.
so,
Yes.
the great because George Washington Carver died in the 1940s, and,
Yeah.
the
Mhm,
great migration continued, and we moved to these big urban cities,
mhm,
and then
mhm.
the next generation now is dependent on fast food. And now
Yes.
all of the things that were done to indigenous Americans, Native Americans, to
Mhm.
African Americans, and now, has 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 expanded, and now is part of every American diet now.
Yes.
And
Yes.
seeing,
Yes.
as you said, disease, disease,
Yes.
disease.
Yes.
So what's the way forward? What's the way forward so that we can, a lot of us don't have access to land, and land is now a huge, commodity, and is
Mhm,
is
mhm,
and
mhm.
the corporations, these billionaires, they're buying up land like crazy, not just here in the United States, but abroad as well as in Africa, all over the world. So what's the way forward for us to have a healthy food system and go back to the practices that
Mhm,
our
mhm,
ancestors
mhm.
um, you know, developed and created and shared?
Absolutely. Let me begin by saying that, again, I'm a person who takes this longer look at us as a species long before humans, emerged on the earth some 2 or 3 million years ago. Earth's been around, they say, about 4.5 billion years. Okay. And she's the mother of all that's on the earth now. That's what she's produced. And that, and then so within that, I'm saying that humans are the newest species on the earth. Okay. Again, other species, flowering plants and trees, many animals have emerged, millions of years before humans arose. So, so we're like um, the newest species with a new kid on the block, and we're still trying to discover what it means to be human. Okay. Again, if you look at trees, been around 200 million years, they know who they are. They know their role, they know their function, and they know that they only take what they need, okay, and they give back as a rather reciprocity. So I view us as a species that we're trying to mature as a species. I use a butterfly metaphor to kind of bring that understanding that humans are like caterpillars. Okay, right now we're like caterpillars eating everything up. We think we know it all. We're pooping everywhere. We're making messes. That's how we are as a species. And we think we're like adolescents in terms of the maturation. But right now we're in this midst of going into a cocoon stage. Okay, as a species, because we're trying to discover this next level of maturation for what we can become. And we're in this cocoon stage, and that's where we kind of like are now, is how I look at it. And within the cocoon state, within that chrysalis, there are cells in there called imaginal cells. And those imaginal cells, part of their destiny and part of their responsibility is to reorder all the other cells to become what? To become a butterfly. So if you can imagine the conversation within that chrysalis saying, the master tells, okay, feet, look here, y'all have been feet, okay, your whole life. If you're a A monarch, okay, butterfly, caterpillar, you've been on this milkweed your whole life, and all you know is one plant, and all you know is walking around this entire summer on one plant. But you feet, you're destined to be wings. And the feet are saying, the what? What the wing? What the wing do? Okay. What the wing do? The cells are saying, well, we don't quite know entirely. We haven't quite had the vision just yet, but we just know that you feet are destined to be the wings. Then they go to the caterpillar's butt, okay, and say, okay, you butt cells, okay, y'all gonna turn around and you're gonna be the proboscis, okay, that gets to literally go around to all these plants and lick the nectar and the wonderful oils and flavors of a whole variety of plants. And that ultimately, as a butterfly, we're going to be able to fly, have a life that isn't destined to be on one plant. We get to fly, okay, literally thousands of miles. We get to interact with, love on, kiss, create, a pollination with thousands of flowers, and we get to rise to that seventh chakra. I call it the seventh chakra, the third eye, that existence of 360. So that's how I look at it metaphorically. Okay, and you say, what's the way forward? It's that kind of process. I have, it might take us, Zella, maybe who knows, another 100, 200 years, okay, to, for example, just quit fighting wars. One of the beautiful examples I have is in Costa Rica, back in 1949. I forget his name now, but the revolutionary leader of the movement in Costa Rica was able to topple the Spanish dictatorship sponsored by the USA, came into power in 1950. His first act was to dismantle the military. And if you're familiar with Costa Rica, they have no military. They said, we're going to put all of our money, rather than like the USA, half of the federal budget goes to the military. No, that money is going to go into educating our kids. And it's going to go into us as a country devoted to the health of what we call nature, ecology, and the ecosystem. It's where the money goes into. So that gives me a lot of hope, saying, wow, okay, this is a great model, because we need to move as a species to where we, as King said, we won't study war anymore. Okay, it's real critical, because we can't really create sustainable future as long as our nations still find necessary to fight wars and kill people, whether it's in the Gaza, okay, and Gaza is everywhere. Gaza is not only there in Palestine, Gaza in parts of Africa. Gaza is the fires in California, okay, and Gaza is in the urban areas of USA, and Gaza's everywhere. So we need to move away from that kind of mentality of depending upon war. When King died, he talked before he died. In his book, matter of fact, his book, if you ask the way forward, his last book was called Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. And he outlines in there, I think, some beautiful platforms of the way forward. Okay. And he said that the three evils, he said, were racism, militarism, and materialism. Materialism meaning the vulgar love affair with material things, the vulgar consumerism, that where we have to keep producing more and more cars, keep producing all these items that then there's nowhere to put them at because we run out of space, okay, and in the places where we take trash and garbage. So I think the way forward is for us to be grounded in those kinds of wisdoms, okay, that we already talked about, people who possess this wisdom of the way forward. Then I would say as well that I mentioned earlier in the interview, my perception of the six pathways. I say to other people, I say to you, Zella, I say to to the brother here who's helping with the staff, whoever else, well, give me your pathways. Okay, you think about the way forward and what's important in the way forward. And it's my assessment that part of the last 500 years in particular of this European conquest of the world is this sense of disregard exploitation, oppression of women. Okay, and how we treat women is how we treat the earth. They're combined at the hip. So we have to have a whole new sensibility, not whole new, but a greater sense of sensibility about women and the earth. I raised the point numerous times when we go to, like we go to Slow Food Terra Madre, and I raised this question, Zella, at the International Congress there in Torino. I think maybe might have been 2018, maybe whenever the last one was. I was a delegate and was asked to speak, and I asked the audience. I said, "What is the very first best local food?" Since we emphasize local food, healthy food, and so forth, what's the very best first local food? And no one raised their hand. I said, "Well, of course, it's breast milk." Everybody laughed because typically when you go to, like in Italy, for the Slow Food International Gathering, when you go to a food conference, when you go to an agricultural conference, there's no discussion about breast milk or about women. Okay, okay, because because of the patriarchal attitudes within universities, within our curriculum, we've relegated women and breastfeeding out of the whole discussion about food. So we have to, again, that's why we have to begin with what I call woman-centric, earth-centric as the foundational sense of vision for the way forward, okay? Because again, we all come through women, and the human species, has to adopt a more profound sense of regard, love, protection of women, which was also, I think, part of many indigenous cultures already. When Europeans came over here, the women were the ones who set what we call our Supreme Court. They set in the Great Council, and all the questions about the future were in the hands of women. Okay, so to me, that's kind of like the way forward is taking those pathways and seeing, well, how can we the role of young people and art, okay, and hip hop. I gave a lecture at Ohio State just a couple of weeks ago on hip hop, uh, agriculture, and caring for planet and people. Okay, where I kind of grounded again that presentation and those pathways, the important role of art. Okay, and art is we're already everyone's an artist. Okay, we're like the embodiment. Each human person is the embodiment of art. Okay, learning how to speak is an art form. Learning how to walk is an art form. Okay, learning how as a baby to come out of the womb and find your way to a nipple and suck milk is an art form. Our having two eyes and ears, perfect symmetry based upon the golden ratio and the golden mean is all about art. Okay, so we're the embodiment art, and when we externalize art by using our hands and thumbs to create art, we're just externalizing what's already innately within us. So this, again, it's an important role of art in the way forward. I think that I would say that as a professor there at Dillard, I worked at the University of Kentucky for about 20 years, did my, undergrad and graduate work there. So I have that sense of time spent at universities. I understand their weaknesses and strengths. And I also regard universities as the most powerful entities on the earth. Universities are more powerful than U.S. government, more powerful than U.S. military, more powerful than the UN, more powerful than Google and all the other corporations. Why are they more powerful? Because all the leaders of corporations, all the leaders of the military, all the leaders of government, corporations, and whatever are educated where? At higher education. Okay? So if we can have this sense of radical transformation, this radical new way of teaching, new way of designing curriculum, new way of designing campuses in higher education, then that can provide a leap in terms of the way forward, a leap, what we call this idea of a sustainable future based upon justice for all beings, human beings, again, plant, animal, air, water. They're all part of our new sense of the future. there's a growing movement began about 10 or 12 years ago, largely initially out of South America with the people in Oaxaca and the Via Campesino and Ecuador and Bolivia around what's called the rights of nature or the rights of Mother Earth, which says that we need to have new jurisprudence. We need to have new wording in our constitutions based upon the rights of nature, the rights of river, the rights of water, the rights of mountains. It's part of the way forward. We've been living rather homocentrically, okay, gazing at our navels as human species. And back to the first principle, earth-centric, woman-centric, we now have to have a lens of earth-centric. So the way forward means that every country, okay, in the world has to begin to figure out and adopt this new language within the legal jurisprudence about the rights of nature, the rights of water, and also then every university, okay, within its board of trustees, within the higher administration, need to be thinking about how do we write in our regulations and rules of how we run our university, okay? What are the business laws? What are the codes of conduct? What are the kind of written proscripts of how we act at the university? How do we build into that this question of the rights of nature, the rights of Mother Earth? And right now, we don't have that because, by and large, universities operate as if the Earth doesn't matter. Two friends of mine up in Canada. One works at the University of I think Toronto, or anyway, two Canadian professors. I wrote this book some years ago. It's called Planet U. U meaning the alphabet U. Planet U, reinventing universities as if the planet mattered. And right now, by and large, universities were formed 500, 600 years ago by the ruling class people, the kings and queens, as a place where their children could go and get a liberal arts education and help rule the world. That was the purpose of universities 500, 600 years ago. And it's still, by and large, okay, the purpose, okay, of higher education is to do, by and large, the work, the bidding of the large corporations. So the way forward means that we must begin to adopt a different sense of mission of higher education. Well, the primary mission is the health, okay, of the Earth systems, okay? The education of our children needs to be, the focus is how do we create with the Earth and all of its various life forms, okay, non-human forms, this sense of sacred regard. That's the mission. That ought to be the mission of higher education, okay? Not just to get a job, okay, or to get a degree, or to get, a profession, write a book. That's all fine. That's all part of what we do. But the mission ought to be, how do we give young people this sense of sacred regard for our relationship as being, right now, humans, I think that's what Eddie McKeevy said a couple of years ago when our theme at Terra Madre was, I think was regeneration, that humans are destined to be the co-regenerators of the earth. We have destroyed so much, we've caused so many species to be extinct, that right now our responsibility is now to become this sense of co-regenerators of the earth, which means trying to replenish the great variety of seed and plant varieties, trying to make sure that we're not acting as predators on animals and plants and other people and whatever, but that we're acting to be the preservers of, the stewards of, the protectors of all these life forms. And to do that means that we have to stop looking at over there is the environment, over there is nature, but that we are nature, okay? Our buildings are as much nature as the bird nest, as nests for birds. We are nature. And that, so we have to, so the way forward means that at universities, which we haven't done largely, there ought to be a critique of this Newtonian, based upon Isaac Newton, this Newtonian Cartesian view of the world that arose 500 years ago. And right now, that's the predominant way of thinking globally. Okay, when you come to university, no one tells us, when you come through here, you're going to become an expert a Newtonian Cartesian view of the world, which is a worldview that says the earth is a machine, okay, that can be broken apart like a clock and understood. The earth isn't the source of all life, okay, but the earth is a resource to be mined, to be devastated, the mountains tops to be blown off, okay, the oceans to fill with chemicals and poisons, and all the earth is the mother of the earth, okay, is the source of all life. Again, so that way of thinking that arose 500 years ago is still the prevailing wisdom that is taught largely in universities. When you go around the campuses and the buildings and the ag departments are based upon this antiquated science of Newtonian science. Quantum science says that we're all from the same source. Quantum science says we're all interconnected and we're all interdependent. But again, we're not really teaching current science just yet. We're still teaching archaic science. So the way forward means that universities, again, that educate, train, prepare all the leaders of all the various institutions. That obligation is to shift and not only a different kind of a curriculum, but a different way to design campuses. Campuses ought to be the models of sustainability. Right now, on most campuses, there's too much called green concrete, which means grass. Grass isn't sustainable. As you know, you only have about an inch or two of roots, okay? We need to have all around the campuses all kinds of perennials, especially those that are native to these regions. The tree canopy ought to be trees that are flowering trees so as to help feed the pollinators. Okay. And right now, so the way forward means a radical shifting of universities and how we teach, curriculum, landscape. And I would say lastly, that the way forward means we have to also try to figure out if we can make these, you mentioned earlier the great migration, people going north into the large urban areas. We've got to figure out if we can make these large urban areas livable for everybody. And right now, I don't think so. Okay, so we got to kind of rethink our U.S., our nation, our country, and maybe we need a great migration in the opposite direction. Maybe we need people to move out of the urban areas into what you might call rural areas and almost like literally build communities from scratch. If you were going to build a sustainable city or town, what would it look like? I think that's the challenge that we have in the way forward. And I think the universities would be a great place. I work a lot with these architectural schools, design schools, at many universities. When I was in Detroit in particular, and we had this whole vision of Detroit based upon urban agriculture. But right now, the urban cities aren't livable, okay, for everybody. There's an increasing number of people who are homeless. There's all this epidemic of opioids and all kinds of drugs and whatever else. And the size of the cities, to be sustainable means, Zella, we can't be driving to work, say in these large urban areas like Atlanta, Chicago, New York, DC, and spend an hour and a half, 2 hours in a car, one way. That means we're spending 4 hours, okay, going to work. That's not sustainable. And right now, we're not thinking at those kind of large levels, and we need to think about, again, those larger levels in the way forward. So we've got some work to do.
We do have some work to do. And, I want to thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, the way forward. It's definitely going to have to be a part 2, part 3, because you have so much to share. And we thank you for your work. We thank you for everything that you've done just for all of us globally who are in this work and who are fighting for a more just and a more equitable food system. So
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me be here today, dear. I love you so much. I talk about you all the time, okay?
Aw.
I
Love you too, Jim.
I do. Yeah, I went to Ohio State, Central State, talking about you and you're bringing students over there to give them that experience. It's so powerful. It's so important. And I've got some folks who I'm going to be introducing you to who want to understand, well, how did they take over there 2 or 3 faculty and all these students? I said, I don't know how they did it.
Fundraising.
They figured it out, okay? I love
Yes,
it so much.
indeed.
Yeah.
We sell plates. We sell, we dance on the corner. We do whatever we have to do. Okay.
Hey, we gotta be.
Amen. Yes. Thank y'all for joining Culture and Flavor.
I wake up in the morning and I'm feeling a vibe. Give thanks to the Father, I'm breathing alive.
Culture and Flavor is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org.